Hello and welcome to PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz, and today we have another fantasy file on tap. I want to talk some Darren Waller, everybody. I think we all realize, if you've played fantasy football over the years, that tight end, the position, if you have one of the big three players, it kind of gives you an edge. And Waller, make no mistake about it, has been in that top three. It's really any metric you want to look at. Fantasy points, absolutely. But just in terms of his PFF receiving grade since 2019, he's number 3. Receptions, he's second. Receiving yards, he's second. Who's in first? Travis freaking Kelce. We all know this, but it really is everything, people. I mean, missed tackles for us, he's 4th. Contested catches, he's 1st. Yards per route run, he's 4th. I mean, volume and efficiency tells us that Darren Waller has been a top 3 tight end in the league over the past 2 years, and truly like one of the better stories that you can come around. I mean, for him to come out with the Ravens, just not really have, didn't give himself a chance due to substance abuse problems to really make the team to make an impact. And for him to turn his career around on the Raiders, it really has been one of the better stories in the NFL over the past 2 years. But truly, people, in 2019, 90 catches, 1,145 yards, 3 scores. Last year, 107 catches, 1,196 yards, and 9 scores. He is a true number 1 pass game option, and the Raiders are treating him as such. I was a little worried about him last year. I think I had him as my tight end 4 behind Mark Andrews, Kelce, and Kittle, so not like I was down on the guy. But for me, the issue was, why the hell are the Raiders signing Jason Witten? Foster Moreau, their other tight end, was actually really good as a rookie. And I think there was even someone else they added. Like they got Nick O'Leary, a dude that never wears any gloves. Like the Raiders it's like what they're doing with the running back room this year with Kenyon Drake. It's like you already have a running back. They already had a tight end, Waller. Why are they adding more? We'll see how that situation, pans out on another podcast. But for Waller, clearly Jason Witten, Moreau, none of these guys made an impact with his snaps and more importantly, targets. So that was great to see. And now looking at this team, moving forward, there's no one else to take these targets. They've added John Brown to replace Nelson Aguilar, and otherwise it's Henry Ruggs, Brian Edwards, Hunter Renfrow. I think Zay Jones is probably still there. We got, Kenyon Drake taking some stuff, but Darren Waller is more ingrained as the Raiders' number 1 pass game target than ever, and he deserves to be. And, he is a tight end, but truly, people, he's a number 1 receiver. He did spend 35% of his snaps in the slot or out wide. That's a middling number. We see guys like Mike Gesicki play like 70, 80%. Some like George Kittle are more true inline tight ends and don't usually flex out quite as much. So 35% snaps in the slot or out wide. You pull up the highlights for Waller, you'll see him defeating legit cornerbacks, safeties, linebackers, whoever you want to put on the guy. He's just too big, too strong, too fast for really any one mere mortal to kind of deal with him. So, we'll see if he gets 100, I believe 46 targets he had again last year. But even if that number sinks a little bit, I just think relative to the rest of the tight ends, it's still going to be huge. I mean, since 2019, Kelce has 269 targets. Waller has 255. All the way in 3rd place is Zach Ertz at 196. So Kittle would likely be far closer if he hadn't been hurt last year. And you can even say the same thing about Ertz in all likelihood. But truly, I mean, Waller, he turns 29 here in a couple months, I believe. And I feel like there's no reason to really expect a drop-off. I know I say he's too big, too strong, too fast, but all those things are true, but this is not like a Jonnu Smith type of tight end where they just win on that overwhelming physicality. This guy is a polished route runner. That's how you catch 107 passes in a year. You don't get by on physical tools alone and put up those types of numbers. And, we saw really what the ceiling is in that final stretch of 2020. I mean, if you had him on your fantasy team, you definitely didn't forget about this. But for those that weren't watching a ton of Raiders football in December last year, which I can't say I blame you, I mean, you guys missed Waller put on performance after performance. He went for 200 yards and 2 tutties against the Jets. His worst game of the stretch was 7 catches for 75 yards, goes 9-151 with Marcus Mariota under center for most of the game, catches 5 of 6 targets for 112 yards against the Dolphins. I swear, like every one of those catches was contested and truly a great play. And then finally ends the year with 9 catches, 117 yards, and a tutty against the Broncos. So Waller, he's a top 3 tight end by every metric we want to find, volume and efficiency wise. He has more volume than anyone other than Travis Kelce. It's one of the great freaking scenarios in fantasy football, people, when we get a high-end talent that meets high-end opportunity, and that is what Waller has. And hey, if you've been listening to this podcast for a bit, like we like Derek Carr here, even though I am still blocked by him on Twitter. If you're listening, Derek, please unblock me. I'm being nicer these days, but with Derek Carr. He was great last year. It was his best season. It was better than his fraudulent 2016 MVP campaign. The only problem was the Raiders ranked 30th in scoring defense this time. They were averaging, I think they allowed 24 points per game in 2016. Last year, it was like 30. So you look at QB rating, big time throw rate, yards per attempt, adjusted completion rate. Derek Carr was really the best version of himself that we've seen yet in 2020. And I think the fact that he did it with, good, not great weapons. I don't think we would kind of rank the Raiders wide receivers and tight ends as like a top 5 group of players in the league. Give Derek Carr some credit for, elevating the supporting cast around him. I hope that he continues to play well. I'm not super optimistic he will because, some of the offensive line reshuffling. But I think when we zoom out a little bit, because there was a lot of guys randomly getting cut in the earlier on parts of the offseason, we do see the Raiders now not having a top 5 offensive line in terms of dollars spent on them for the first time since at least 2015. But Richie Incognito coming out of retirement, Alex Leatherwood, being a first-round tackle. I know they reached on him according to a lot of, draft experts, but if they can get those guys playing well, I think the offensive line will be far from a liability. So, moving forward, quick PFF Lilly stat on Darren Waller before we get to his rank. Since 2019, people, in fantasy points per game, full point PPR, Travis Kelce's at 18.3. Kittle is in second at 15.8, but Waller is only at 15.6, people, like just a 0.2 difference between Kittle and Waller over the past 2 years. And then we have a big drop off all the way to Mark Andrews at 13, and nobody else is over even 12 fantasy points per game. Like, we just do not see this sort of drop off at any other position. And it really is why, if you're out there doing these best ball drafts, or if you're just in a single tight end league, I think that there's a lot to be said about using one of your first 3 picks to try to get one of Kittle, Waller, or Kelce. I had my fantasy football tight end tiers article go out. I do think Kelce is in that top one alone. People, between Waller and Kittle, it's a big conversation. And Andrew Erickson and myself actually did discuss this on the 519 edition of this podcast. But I think I'm ready to go ahead and do it. Darren Waller over George Kittle in 2021. And if you ask me to say who's the best tight end in the league, everything considered, I think it's George Kittle. If I was running a team, I would want George Kittle over any other tight end at this point in time. With all due respect, Travis Kelce, getting a little bit older, it's tough to, obviously, George Kittle would be playing a little bit better if he had Patrick Mahomes as quarterback as too. Neutral situation, neutral everything. If God could turn injuries off, give me George Kittle. That's not what we're looking at, though. It's not a neutral situation. We can't turn injuries off. And you look at the quarterback predicament. Okay, we know Jimmy G can enable Kittle. We've seen Kittle do just fine with guys like Nick Mullins, CJ Beathard under center. He's such a yak monster that, I'm not too concerned about the quarterback play with Jimmy G. The problem is, what if we go to Trey Lance and I don't know, he just doesn't feed Kittle a ton. They need to keep Kittle in more to block. They become even more of a run-first offense. Like, Trey Lance has the potential to almost be a Taysom Hill type fantasy asset. Fantastic if you have Trey Lance, but for everybody else involved, it might be more of a net negative. It's just more of a concern than Derek Carr, who just fed Darren Waller, more targets than anybody at the position. Literally, I think more than Kelce just in 2020 alone. Derek Carr just fed him that. He just did so efficiently. Like, quarterback, it just goes on Waller's side. Volume. Again, everything we just talked about, 49ers being more crowded. Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel. It's more crowded than anything Darren Waller's looking at. With all due respect to Smokey Brown, Henry Ruggs, Brian Edwards, Hunter Renfrow, Zay Jones, it's just less crowded in, Las Vegas. So Waller too. And then finally, like, the defense. The 49ers, the market says that they have like the second best defense in the league. And I think that is wrong, and I would not put them number 2, but I sure as hell put them a hell of a lot higher over the Raiders. So defense is also on Waller's side. So again, Kittle, pure talent, being a better real-life tight end, give him that point. Everything else is with Waller. And again, in fantasy, we say it over and over again, we don't want to chase talent, we want to chase volume. Waller happens to have both, and because I'm concerned about Kittle's volume, I'm going Darren Waller, tight end 2 in 2021. A lot to be said. I'm making a big deal about moving one guy up a spot, one guy down a spot, but I do think, relative to a lot of the industry and myself, I had Kittle over Waller at first, but the more I look at it and the more I consider every factor, and particularly them drafting Trey Lance instead of Mac Jones, I do think Darren Waller deserves to be tight end 2 in 2021. People, if you've enjoyed the podcast, I invite you to check out the rest of our podcast network, which covers everything NFL, college, and fantasy football. Recap the NFL draft with Mike Renner and Austin Gale, 2-for-1 draft podcast, or get all the 2021 betting content you need with the PFF forecast. And hey, if you want to use what you've learned and go try and make some money on your own, I invite you to go to Underdog Fantasy. If you like fantasy football and if you like playing fantasy for money, you need to check out Underdog Fantasy. Underdog's got everything, including season-long and playoff best ball. Best ball is a season-long game where you draft a team like you normally do, but that's it. There's no in-season roster management. Underdog automatically selects your best performers each week, saving you loads of time. So go to Underdog Fantasy, deposit $10 using promo code PFF and get a free PFF Edge annual subscription. That's promo code PFF. Draft now at Underdog Fantasy. If you've enjoyed these podcasts, I invite you to check out my 100 article in 100-day series over at PFF.com. Guess what? I'm writing 1,000, 1,500 word articles about all these topics I'm also talking about here. I truly believe forcing yourself to write out your thoughts kind of helps rationalize what's going on, and it leads to better conclusions. So writing about it, we're talking about it, we're being about it this fantasy football offseason, and I thank you all for joining along as always. So until next time, take care, everybody, and thank you again for listening to PFF Fantasy Football Podcast.